Elara Pang was supposed to be the one person in that room who didn't actually matter. The placement agency had been clear when they called on a Tuesday afternoon. Conference interpreter, Mandarin to English, one evening session, Bay Street Financial Tower, dress code business formal, standard terms. Elara had done 200 jobs like it. She'd sat in glass-walled boardrooms while men in suits argued about cargo weights and derivative instruments and licensing agreements, translated their words with precise, dispassionate accuracy, and then gone home on the subway and eaten leftover rice and watched 40 minutes of television before falling asleep. She was very good at being the furniture. Elara was 29 years old, Chinese-Canadian, born in Scarborough to parents who had themselves been born in Scarborough to a grandmother who had not. She was what a doctor at her last physical had carefully described as above average body weight for her height, the medical establishment's polite way of saying she was fat, and Elara had found the circumlocution so elaborate she'd almost laughed in the examination room. She was 5'4" and solid, with wide hips and a full figure that her professional wardrobe, a rotation of well-cut blazers and wide-leg trousers, did nothing to disguise. Because Elara had stopped trying to disguise it sometime in her mid-20s when she'd realized that her clients weren't looking at her anyway. They were looking past her, to the next person at the table, the next document, the next deal. She was a conduit, a translation machine, thoroughly, reliably invisible. Which was why she had been hired tonight. The 38th floor boardroom of the Harwick Tower had the exact quality of expensive silence that Elara associated with rooms where very serious money changed hands. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the whole downtown core glittering below like something spilled. A long table of dark walnut with 8 chairs, only 5 occupied. A bottle of still water at each place setting, and not a single pen or notepad visible, because the men in this room did not write things down. At the head of the table sat Ruslan Morev. She had found almost nothing when she'd searched his name the afternoon before the job. A LinkedIn profile for a company called Meridian Cargo Partners, a few mentions in trade publications, one photograph from a harborfront fundraising gala dated 3 years back. A tall man in a dark suit, standing at the edge of a crowd, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned that watching was more useful than participating. He was broad-shouldered, with close-cropped grey-brown hair and a jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete at birth. He was not conventionally handsome. He was the kind of man who made you think the word formidable before you thought anything else. In person, he was worse. He sat with a stillness that the other men in the room kept glancing at, the way passengers on a calm flight keep checking the wings in bad weather. Not because anything was wrong, because the absence of movement in something that powerful was its own kind of warning. The Hong Kong delegation sat across the table. 3 men, 2 junior associates who had flown in from Vancouver, and Lau Chi-Ming, the principal, a compact man in his early 60s, with an expensive watch, and the confidence of someone who had never in his life been made to wait. Lau had been pleasant through the first hour, businesslike, precise, his Mandarin clean and formal. The negotiation was ostensibly about a container logistics agreement between Meridian Cargo and Lau's trading company, Pacific Meridian Holdings. Elara translated. She kept her voice neutral and her face professionally blank. She watched the water-glass condensation rings form on the coasters and thought about whether she had time to stop at the Scarborough Town Centre T&T on the way home to pick up the specific brand of herbal throat lozenges her grandmother liked, which you could only find there and nowhere else. It was at the 90-minute mark that Lau Chi-Ming shifted in his chair and leaned fractionally toward the associate on his left. They were done with the formal Mandarin portion of the meeting. Morev was examining a document. No one was looking at the interpreter. Lau spoke very quietly, and he did not speak in Mandarin. He spoke in Taishanese. Elara Pang's entire nervous system went quiet. Taishanese was not Cantonese. It was older, rougher, a dialect spoken in a cluster of counties in the Pearl River Delta that had been the origin point of most of the first wave of Chinese immigration to Canada in the 19th and early 20th centuries. By the time Elara was born, most Taishanese families in Toronto had shifted to Cantonese or Mandarin or English for daily life. It was a language of grandmothers, of kitchens, of conversations adults had when they didn't want children to understand. Elara's grandmother, Po Chen, had arrived at Pearson International in 1971 with $40 Canadian, a sewing kit, and an absolute refusal to learn more than 30 words of English. She had raised 3 children and 6 grandchildren in Scarborough, and she had spoken to every single one of them exclusively in the Taishan village dialect of her hometown, specific enough that even other Taishanese speakers occasionally had trouble following it. Elara was fluent. She was more than fluent. She thought in it sometimes when she was frightened. Lau said to his associate, quietly, casually, "The way a man speaks when he is certain no one at the table can follow him, don't look nervous. By the time his accountants find the discrepancy in the Deltaport figures, we are already gone. The Russian has been looking at the wrong company. He'll go after old Young's operation, not ours." The associate gave a small nod and reached for his water glass. Elara looked at the painting on the wall, a large abstract canvas in blues and charcoals. She stared at the lower left corner and kept her breathing exactly even. They were framing someone else for the money they had taken, and the man at the head of the table did not know. She needed to leave this room. Her phone vibrated in the breast pocket of her blazer, then again. Then the specific pattern, 2 short, 1 long, she had set for the nursing home in Scarborough where her grandmother lived. Elara's stomach dropped. She looked at Morev. "I'm sorry," she said, very quietly. "I need to step out for a moment. It is a family emergency." Morev looked up from the document. His eyes were a pale, unusual grey-green, the color of the lake in February. They were not unkind. They were simply calculating. "Stay in the room," he said. "Keep it brief." Elara moved to the far corner, the small service alcove beside the credenza, and answered. It was the night shift nurse from the 5th floor dementia unit, her voice carefully controlled in the way of someone describing a situation that was not a medical crisis but was nonetheless urgent. Elara's grandmother was distressed. She was asking for someone, repeating a name, and the night staff could not determine if she was in pain or simply frightened, because her English had always been limited and was now, at 84, almost entirely gone. "Put her on," Elara said. And then, because there was no other way to reach her grandmother, no other language, no other register, no other tone of voice that would cut through the fog and land in the part of Po's mind that still recognized safety, Elara spoke in Taishanese. Not a whisper. She kept her voice low, but the dialect required its own music, the rising tones, the specific consonant clusters, the cadences of a village in Guangdong that no longer existed the way it had when her grandmother left it. She used the word for "I'm here" that her grandmother had used with her when she was small and had nightmares. She used the phrase "for you're safe, lie down, the night is just the night." She told her grandmother that she would come on Sunday, that she would bring the lozenges, that she had not forgotten, that she was all right, that everything was all right. It took 4 minutes. When Elara lowered the phone and turned back to the room, she understood immediately that something had changed. The document lay flat on the table. No one was looking at it. Lao Chi Ming was the color of old paper. Ruslan Morev had not moved a single centimeter in his chair, but he was looking at Elara with the undivided, focused attention of a man who has just realized that the room he thought he controlled contained something he did not account for. The meeting concluded 11 minutes later. Elara gathered her bag and her coat from the credenza hook and moved toward the boardroom door. She had her hand on the handle when she heard the footstep behind her. She had clocked the large, quiet man standing near the window throughout the meeting, not seated, not introduced, not explained, security detail. She had noticed him when she walked in and deliberately stopped looking at him for the rest of the evening, the way she stopped looking at anything in a room that was not her job to think about. He placed one hand flat on the door above her head very gently and said, "Mr. Morev would like another word." The boardroom was empty except for the two of them. Morev stood at the window with his back to her, looking at the city below. He waited until his man had closed the door before he spoke. "You understand Taishanese," he said, not a question. Elara set her bag down on the nearest chair. She had made a decision somewhere between the first and second ring of her grandmother's voice that if she survived this night, she was going to renegotiate her freelance rate upward by 40%. She was dramatically underpaid for the level of situation she apparently walked into professionally. "Yes," she said. What did Lau say to his associate? She told him, word for word, with the precision that 5 years of work had trained into her. Not interpretation, not paraphrase, but exact reproduction. The Taishanese original and the English translation, without editorializing. When she finished, there was a long silence. "He told you this knowingly." He told his associate. "He didn't think I could follow it." No one would. Morev turned from the window. Taishanese is not taught. It is not studied. To most of the world, it barely qualifies as a language at all. It is something that happens in the kitchens of specific families in specific parts of the diaspora, and it dies when the grandmothers die. He said this with a flatness that was not dismissive. It sounded, in fact, almost like recognition. Lau has been working in Canada for 11 years. He would have confirmed many times that there is no one in my organization who speaks it. "He wasn't wrong about your organization," Elara said. "No," Morev agreed. "He was wrong about the room." He crossed to the credenza and poured 2 glasses of water and held one out. She took it. Her hands were steady. She was quite proud of that. "The Delta port figures he mentioned," Elara said. "What port?" Morev's eyes shifted. "Delta, south of Vancouver, container terminal." "What dates is the discrepancy covering?" A pause. "Why?" "Because I do a significant amount of work for import-export firms. Customs hearings, regulatory negotiations. I'm familiar with how CBSA records container releases publicly." She pulled her phone from her pocket. "If you tell me the date range, I can cross-reference the public record against whatever your manifests show in about 2 minutes. The look on Ruslan Morev's face was not the look Elara had expected. She had anticipated suspicion, or impatience, or the particular coldness of a man who did not like being offered help he hadn't requested. What she saw instead was the expression of a person who has been searching for a specific tool for a very long time and has just discovered it sitting in an interpreter's blazer pocket. 14 months, he said. Containers marked as industrial equipment, 3 separate release dates. Elara pulled up the Canada Border Services Agency database. She cross-referenced the declared goods against the publicly accessible release records for the Deltaport terminal. It took under 3 minutes. The declared weights don't match the terminal offloading records on 2 of the 3 dates, she said. There's a 40-minute gap on the 3rd one between the CBSA release timestamp and the carrier log. That's not normal. That's a secondary transfer. She turned the phone so he could see the screen. Whoever filed on behalf of Pacific Meridian Holdings on those dates was running a shadow manifest alongside the declared one. The CBSA records can't tell you what was in the containers, but they can tell you that something was moved that wasn't in the paperwork. Morev took the phone from her hand. He looked at the screen for a long time. "This is public information," he said. "Yes. My accountants have been working on this for 3 weeks. Your accountants were probably looking at financial records. This is a logistic discrepancy. It reads differently." She retrieved her phone. "I've spent 5 years sitting in rooms where people argue about the gap between what a shipping document says and what a terminal actually handled. I know what it looks like." There was a very long silence. Lau's group is already on their way to the airport, Elara said, because she had been thinking about this since the boardroom and felt it was relevant. He said by the time his accountants find it. Present tense. He knows you're close. Moref picked up his own phone. He spoke briefly in Russian to someone on the other end. 3 sentences, clipped and quiet, and then put it down. You cannot go home tonight, he said. I understand that, Elara said, which seemed to surprise both of them slightly. The escalade moved through the late-night downtown without urgency. Grigor drove. Moref sat beside Elara in the back and looked out the window at the lights strung along the Gardner, and for the first stretch neither of them spoke. Your grandmother, Moref said finally. She is well. She was confused. She's more confused at night. A beat. She's 84. She came here in 1971 from a village in Guangdong. She's never spoken anything but Taishanese. The nursing home does their best. My babushka came from Kharkiv, Moref said. She spoke Ukrainian and a little Russian, and she died in Mississauga at 91, still believing that winter in Canada was a personal insult specifically directed at her. He paused. She also refused to learn English. Elara looked at the side of his face. The city lights slid across his jaw in orange and white. She sounds stubborn, Elara said. She was magnificent, Moref said. They said nothing else until Yorkville. The condominium was not what she'd expected. Spare and extremely clean, with the quality of a space lived in by someone who had not yet decided to treat it as a home. High ceilings, one large piece of art on the main wall, a landscape, somewhere flat and cold and windswept, a kitchen that looked used, books on a shelf that were actually read. She could see the broken spines. She was given a guest room with a view of the street and told to make herself comfortable. She did not make herself comfortable. She sat on the edge of the bed and thought for 45 minutes, and then she put her laptop on the desk and did the thing she did when she was frightened and needed to feel like herself, which was work. There was a thought she couldn't shake loose. The shell company. Lau's group had used a Vancouver-registered entity for the shadow manifests. She had seen the agent of record on the CBSA filing, a nominee director service, the kind that provided generic names for corporate registrations at a fee. Those services rotated directors across multiple entities. If she could pull the BC corporate registry filing for Pacific Meridian Holdings and cross-reference the director name against other active registrations. She had the BC corporate registry on screen in 4 minutes, free public access. She had the director name from the CBSA filing. She ran the search function, which was, as always, temperamental and prone to timing out, and she went around it the way she always did, which was patient repetition and the willingness to sit in the dark with a laptop long after most people would have given up. She found 4 entities sharing the same nominee director. She built a spreadsheet. It took her just under an hour. When she knocked on the study door and Moref opened it, he was still in his suit jacket, a glass of something amber in one hand, the expression of a man who had been on the phone continuously for the past hour. Elara set the laptop on his desk. 4 shell companies, she said, all registered in BC in the last 3 years. 3 of them have had the same nominee director rotated through. The 4th shares a filing agent with the 3rd. I've mapped the container release records I could access against the registration dates. The first company was stood up 2 months after Lau's group began operating through Deltaport, which means it was created for the scheme, not before it. She pointed to the spreadsheet. This column is the registration number. This one is the director. This one is my best inference on which operation it's linked to based on the release date pattern. That address in Burnaby appears 3 times in the filing records. That is not a coincidence. That is a central location. Moref set down the glass. He stood in front of the laptop and read without speaking. You built this in an hour, he said. I'm fast with spreadsheets. This took my people 3 weeks and they did not get here. Your people were looking for financial evidence. This is corporate registry evidence. Different database, different search logic. She paused. It's also free. Anyone can access it. He looked at her then, directly, fully, with the same quality of focused stillness she had noticed in the boardroom, but without the professional calculation layered over it. Just the attention itself, stripped of everything else. She had spent her entire professional life in rooms full of powerful people who looked through her. It was startling, she found, to be looked at instead. Morev made one call, 2 sentences, he closed the laptop. Grigor leaves in 20 minutes, he said. Semyon is already in Vancouver. Elara nodded. She did not ask what would happen when they arrived at that Burnaby address, because she had concluded that she did not want to know, and that her not knowing was an active professional courtesy being extended in both directions. She was on her 3rd coffee, and it was 4:30 in the morning when Morev came and sat across from her at the kitchen island, not beside her, across, in the way of someone who intends to have a conversation that requires the ability to read a face clearly. Lau is not going to be in a position to make your situation a concern, he said. Elara held the mug with both hands. Good. You can go home in the morning. Also good. He was quiet for a moment. I want to offer you a position. I'm not going to work for. I have 14 legitimate businesses, Morev said, with the mild patience of a man correcting a minor misunderstanding rather than a significant one. 3 operate in import and export. 2 handle regulatory compliance with federal agencies. 1 is in the middle of a contract dispute with a Chinese state-adjacent manufacturing partner, and I have been unable to find a single interpreter who understands both the legal terminology and the logistics documentation in the same language at the same time. He looked at her steadily. I am also not the kind of man who employs people he cannot afford to lose. Every person who works for me can be replaced. What I am describing is a different category. What category is that? Someone whose value comes from what they notice, Morev said, not what they're told to look at. Elara set the mug down. Outside, the city was doing what it did at 4:30 in the morning. The particular dim, almost quiet that would resolve itself in another hour into the first commuters and the delivery trucks, and the smell of the day beginning. You'd have to actually pay me, she said, not consult on demand, a real arrangement. I would insist on it. My rate is going up. Naturally. I have a grandmother in Scarborough who needs visits twice a week. That does not change. That does not change, he agreed, without any hesitation at all. She picked up the coffee again. I want to see any contract in Mandarin and English before I sign anything. I would expect nothing less. Elara looked at him across the kitchen island, at the man who had spent the last 6 hours watching her dismantle a criminal operation with public databases and a freelancer's working knowledge of federal shipping records, and she thought about the fact that every room she had ever sat in had assumed she was the furniture, and that apparently the most dangerous consequence of that assumption was not being overlooked. It was sitting next to someone who noticed the exact moment you weren't. Fine, she said, but I am getting the lozenges from T&T on Sunday. That is not negotiable. The faintest suggestion of something that might, in better light, have been a smile crossed Ruslan Morev's face. The logistics, he said, are entirely up to you.